Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Your Legislators here on KRWG Public Media. I'm Anthony Murnau. Starting us off with the first episode of the season is New Mexico District 36 Democratic State Senator Jeff Steinborn. Senator Steinborn is a member of the Senate Finance Committee. He joins us now to talk about legislation he is working on. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Anthony. Good to be with you.
Always great to talk with you. I'd like to hear about legislation you're working on that has to do with the pandemic. You're working on legislation to get New Mexicans free quality face masks to fight against COVID-19 as well as COVID-19 testing kits. What can you tell us about this legislation?
So what more and more data is telling us about this Omicron variant is that several of the masks we've been using since this pandemic started are really not effective. Starting with the cloth masks are largely ineffective at all. And then the surgical masks are only partially effective. So what they're recommending are that we all use N95 or KN95 masks, or now there's an N94 mask as well. I think when the pandemic started, we were all discouraged from doing this because we didn't have enough medical supply and we needed it for the medical world. But now there's a lot more production of these masks widely available. And the KN95, literally, they say is 95% protective of restricting the COVID particles from being able to enter your mask or exhale if you have it. And so if two people are wearing a KN95 mask together, literally it would take hours and hours before transmission would occur. Whereas if people are wearing just a cloth mask or something smaller, it's just a matter of minutes. So any prolonged exposure, you're going to get it if COVID is in the area. So what I'm proposing is that the state of New Mexico, and there's a lot of counterfeit masks out there. So someone could think they're doing a good thing and order them on Amazon and end up getting some fairly useless counterfeit masks. So what I'm proposing is the state of New Mexico take a leadership role in ordering a very large quantity to distribute to the state's residents and make available so that we can upgrade us all to KN95 masks. And I think that would make just a huge difference in slowing transmission if they're worn properly, of course.
Okay, now I also want to talk about the testing kits, but what are we looking at dollar amount in regards to how much is going to be appropriated, how much you're pushing to be appropriated to make this happen?
So my legislation for the masks, I'm requesting $10 million. And the masks are about $1 to $1.50 a piece. We, of course, have 2 million residents. So, enough funding so that we can have several masks per person. And unfortunately, that's not that these masks don't last forever. So it's enough to get folks started now. And talking to the Department of Health, if we want to have a good supply that can take us through the year, we may need more funding than that. Also talking about which populations would be best served by getting them to. Apparently, the million New Mexicans on Medicaid who are a little bit lower income are 2.5 more times likely to get COVID. So that might be a good place to start as far as the distribution of masks. But anyway, the main thing is that we really provide enough. If we do this, that we provide enough funding so that it's not just a feel-good one-time thing, but it's actually a public health policy that we can carry out over a period of time, and prepare New Mexico for whatever may be coming down the pike past Omicron.
On to the testing kits. How much is that going to cost New Mexicans? And what are you looking at with a dollar amount with that? And how are we going to get those test kits to New Mexicans? Because we're looking at a time period where we're seeing a surge of cases happen here in our state, dealing with the Omicron variant as well. So what are we going to do to get these testing kits to New Mexicans when they may already be having a tough time getting a rapid test?
Yeah, so the testing situation is a rapidly evolving situation. When I drafted the bill, it was for $50 million. And the best research I could find was that was that these tests were costing about $25 a box for a box of two, and that some of the other states in the country, municipalities that had purchased them, were paying a similar number. So I figured, well, with, again, 2 million New Mexicans, if you were to get them, a couple boxes, and that would be roughly $50 million. Since then, what has occurred, since the bill has been pre-filed, the state of New Mexico has ordered 1 million of these tests through some other federal funding. And now the Biden administration has just announced that they're providing 1 billion tests. And starting, I believe, on the 19th, tomorrow, folks can go online and order up to 4 tests. Might be good to put that web address out before the interview's over, or nonetheless get it out later. But so that's obviously changed. So I think it's taken off some urgency on the testing legislation that I introduced. But having said that, I think we all need to think beyond just the next 2 or 3 months. And because we're only in session once a year, it's important that we provide our Department of Health resources so that they're able to do battle against COVID 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and have these tools. So I'm working with the Department of Health right now to figure out what is the right size package, and I'm hopeful that we can get somewhere and we can get some resources allocated.
Now, I mean, you could probably share a little bit more about how the support is for this bill right now in the Senate and in the House, I'd imagine. But if this is passed, like, how soon can we get masks and testing kits to New Mexicans?
Yes. Well, I think the tests, I think people could start seeing masks and tests fairly soon because of the tests that the state has already ordered. The bigger issue is the backlog of these tests nationally that we all know exist. They're hard to come by. And so, although I think they're coming. So I think I can't give you an exact number. I know that the state is trying to procure them right now. I'm not sure how they're going to get them out. But they, hopefully those will be available.
Well, legislatively,
the next month.
Legislatively, I mean, the process, how quick can it happen to get these out instead of waiting until the next fiscal year?
Yeah, no, as far as the legislative work goes, man, I would have loved it if we would have had a bill ready to go today, if I had consensus on the numbers, and I've been trying to get there. We could approve a bill today, get it up to the governor tomorrow with an emergency clause, and they would have the money to begin procuring these items and start getting them out to New Mexicans. So then it would just be a matter of supply. And I believe that we could get supply within a matter of weeks. It may not be the full amount of masks that we would like to get, depending upon what's available in the market. But I believe we could start increasing the supply right away. So it is a matter of urgency. And I think the administration, the Department of Health, absolutely agrees on that. They're supportive. And so we're just trying to work through the machinery and all the higher levels of authority to kind of arrive at a number. And then I have spoken to my leadership in the Senate about trying to very quickly move a bill once we arrive at that number. So
okay,
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we look forward to keeping an eye on that legislation and see how it unfolds. I want to move on and talk about another issue that you've been pretty passionate about and outspoken over the years, and that is transparency in government. You've led efforts to get meetings broadcasted on the web so that folks can see government in action as it unfolds. I want to talk with you about transparency in that issue. You tweeted out this month, quote, "I have once again introduced legislation to provide for full disclosure of all lobbying activity." What can you tell us about what you're working on in this area?
So there are 2 bills that I've introduced in the past that I have refiled, one of which would require that employers of lobbyists report all the money that they are spending to influence state policy. And this would include everything from lobbyist salaries on down to what they're spending on meals and gifts for, people that they're trying to persuade. Right now, we have huge holes in that disclosure, like the salaries being paid to lobbyists, which is really the largest piece of funding spent to influence us. So if you hire a team of lobbyists, you don't have to report what that costs you. And so we're trying to close that gap and have full disclosure. The other piece that'd be really a game change and sea change around here would require that lobbyists and employers of lobbyists report which bills they're actually working on and the position they're taking on bills. So for the first time now, I have to tell you, as a legislator, since my first day being a legislator, one of the most frustrating things is when you're sitting there listening to a bill and you're saying, who was behind this bill? What's this bill about? And who really wants it? And how would it benefit that person? And I think oftentimes they're obscuring their role because maybe it would make the bill look bad, or they just, you're always given a very innocent story on why a law is being proposed before you. So anyway, I think.
Well, you bring up a good point. I want to talk about that.
Sure.
Let's talk about just how big of an influence lobbyists have on the bills in New Mexico. From your experience, you've served in both the House and, of course, now the Senate. So how big of an influence do lobbyists have on these bills that are being introduced? How many bills come across your committees, do you think, are written by lobbyists?
That's a good question. How big of an influence? A very big influence. And by the way, I mean, there's lobbyists on all sides of the issue. There's lobbyists who work for very good healthcare policy. There's lobbyists who work for extractive industries trying to weaken pollution rules. So it's equal opportunity. And how much is that legislation in total written and helped formulated by an interest group on one side or the other? Gosh, I would say probably over 75%. It may be more, it may be a little bit less, but it's a significant amount. And again, there's lots of suspicion on both sides of the aisle when you see these bills saying, well, who's really behind this? And we openly question it. And now I openly unfortunately have to kind of mock my colleagues a little bit sometimes and say, we have a bill that can tell us this. If we're ready to take this step, we can have transparency that'll tell us exactly who's lobbied behind every bill, what their position is. And so it's important, number one, so that we as legislators know the context of the piece of legislation before we vote on it, so we don't get snookered, so that the system isn't gamed. Number two, I think it's super important for the citizenry of New Mexico and for the media to know real time what forces are at work trying to pass policy in New Mexico, so that you can ask the tough questions, so that the citizens can weigh in and be effective advocates for their best interest. And if you keep the blinders on, intentionally keep the blinders on to where we don't really know who's running the game, then it obscures our effectiveness. Mine as an elected official, yours as a media, and the public's role as citizens. So this would be super valuable to us. Other states have done it. New Mexico, there's like 20 other states that do this. So while it is progressive and good government, it's not precedent setting. In fact, at this point, we're starting to, lead the pack. So it's really reform that we need to get on with and would be healthy for our democracy in New Mexico.
I'm glad you brought up reform, because there has been a lot of talk about that dealing with the New Mexico legislature. There's many challenges. For example, this session is only going to be 30 days. It's a budget focused session. There's so many challenges in New Mexico, and they're going to try to address, of course, mainly the budget, but also other challenges in 30 days. And of course, they have a 60-day session which will come up in 2023. But this issue alone kind of brings up the topic of, is New Mexico really ready to continue with being a citizen legislature? I mean, you have state lawmakers who are working other jobs. There's been a lot of critics say that you can't run for the New Mexico legislature unless you are wealthy or retired and have the time to dedicate it to serve the state. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think New Mexico needs to move to a professionally paid legislature?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you why. So as you point out, I mean, we're just in session essentially 90 days, 90 days every 2 years, 30 days one year, 60 days the other year. So many people, myself included, have other jobs, and we're having to spend a lot of time focused on making a living. So first and foremost, the good government reason why we need to pay our legislators' salaries and give some staff to do this work, and frankly, even look at this 30-day session and making it a 60-day session, is so that we can invest more into our policymaking process. And when we hamstring our legislators by basically forcing them to hold other positions, we're limiting the amount of time they can invest in working on the important policy work and doing what it takes to pass a law, which is not only spending a lot of time on research, but then doing education of your colleagues, building coalitions. All of that takes a lot of time and a lot of advocacy work. And so it's frustrating to me as a legislator to be fighting for these really important reforms for the state, and yet not being able to give the amount of time I would if it was my exclusive undertaking. Number two, as we just talked about, that vacuum of time and effort is really filled by those professional interest groups that do have the time, that are paid to work on this full time. They're the ones that get to fill that gap. It's the executive branch. So we have kind of created a weakened legislative branch by virtue of doing this. And I think in some cases, in my case, and I know a lot of my colleagues, we would get better outcomes if we could work on these issues more year round and be able to invest that time. Having said that, I still think, I'm able to pull out a lot of good victories for the state, but sometimes I'm frustrated that I'm limited. You brought up another good issue, which is who can run. It's an exclusive policy as well, right? If by not paying folks, not everyone has the flexibility to be able to leave their job to come up and serve in the legislature. So it limits the pool of people that can run for office by virtue of that. Now, in my case, I'm not wealthy and I'm not a retiree. I work for a nonprofit. And so it's really sometimes a sacrifice, of income actually to, like in my last employer, I went off the clock to go to the legislature to basically make a per diem. And so I had that flexibility, but it definitely wasn't ideal. But you're right. A lot of retirees and a lot of business owners also serve, and we need to be able to open it up to where just really good public servants that are really passionate about this work can afford to do it. And so, yeah, we do need to reform our system, I believe, in those ways.
Okay, now I certainly want to talk with you more about that in the future, but we obviously have limited time and so many issues. You've been an outspoken, passionate person for the environment. I'd like to hear from you about how you feel the state is in position to make some changes to reach climate goals that it has already established.
Yeah, so this session, there's going to be an important bill. The most important bill that we've passed recently to impact our climate is the Energy Transition Act, which requires energy utilities to move towards carbon neutral energy by 2050. And so that what we're looking at this session is a bill to actually put that into law, to codify those goals into law. And that's pretty significant. And that's a monumentally important bill. Having said that, the international climate experts say that we need to reach those same targets that we're looking at by 2050, really by 2040, if not the late 2030s. There's no point in sugarcoating this. Avoiding climate disaster is not a political solution. It's just science. And so we need to find a way to reach these targets and do our part here in New Mexico, which is all we can do. And of course, elect people in Congress that will do it for the country. But so we're moving in the right direction for sure. And there is a very important bill this session that will put us on the path.
Well, we'll look forward to learning more about that. But this is an issue that is really, people fall on both sides of it in New Mexico because the oil and gas industry is is major in this state. This state depends on the oil and gas industry for revenue. Obviously, things are looking good in that industry right now. So what are some things you think that state lawmakers can do to take advantage of this moment where possibly lay the groundwork for diversifying the state's economy and revenue streams in a sustainable way?
Yeah, we just need to really invest in, frankly, other economic sectors that are on the ascension in New Mexico, like film, like renewable energy, like tourism, like the outdoor economy, like manufacturing in our great, transportation manufacturing hubs like Santa Teresa.
Do you think that the state is really investing enough there in the border region, though, in Santa Teresa?
I do think we've made very significant investments there, and can we be doing more? Probably so. I think we're looking at also providing additional funding for infrastructure there this session as well. So, but we have some really great advocates on the border, like Jerry Pacheco, who we look to a lot to let us know what more we need to be doing. But it's a vital resource for us in Doña Ana County and really the state, and so one we need to be maximizing. And so that's we need to again be diversifying and looking towards the industries of the future, and also creating a very educated population, which one of the biggest investments we're making this session is in education and workforce training, and also broadband, to make sure that we have good internet service across this whole state, which over the last year we're investing probably $1 billion between what the state is spending and what we expect to leverage with the federal government. So these are all pieces of the puzzle. Electric charging stations across the state, which we're investing in, and so I could go on, but it's really it's not a silver bullet kind of an answer. It's an all of the above answer.
Well, it's something that is a challenge for New Mexico. It's been for a long time, dealing with how to implement sustainable economic development, how to improve education. Of course, New Mexico residents are going to vote on a major funding chance for early childhood education later this fall in the midterm elections. But I'd like to hear from you, because you are passionate about film as well. It's an industry that you obviously are very close with and have been pushing to develop here in the southern part of the state, Las Cruces. There's been a lot of news about recent film productions here. What are some things that you think are good about this? And when we're talking about sustainable jobs, what can the film industry do with that? Because we hear a lot about productions, they come and go. So how can we create sustainable jobs within the film industry for not only our region here in southern New Mexico, but the entire state?
Sure. The film industry involves a lot of infrastructure, like studios. It involves a lot of trained personnel. It involves a lot of vendors. And so what I think we're doing in New Mexico right now, and really we started the film incentive program in, I want to say 2002. So we're about 20 years into this. We were one of the first states in the country to offer film incentive, to a film rebate to films to come here, is that we've seen a major investment in film studios, a major buildup of crews, of companies that have moved here. Once those assets are built up, I think there's a certain interest in the industry in staying in New Mexico. Having said that, those having favorable tax policy that is beneficial to them will continue to be essential. I mean, without that, they probably would not stay. And so that's something to be acknowledged. Having said that, this particular session, there's a very exciting idea that I've been in a lot of discussions about, to create a film academy to train workers. Right now, the problem that we're having in the film industry in New Mexico is we have way more work than film workers. And to meet that shortage, the governor's team and the Secretary of Economic Development is proposing creating a film academy, a physical building, and working with film productions and studios to actually create apprenticeships and opportunities, and and help grow this workforce quicker. And so what I'm working to do is make sure that New Mexico State University and Doña Ana Community College is connected to that effort, and possibly even create a film academy south, that there be one up north and that there be one south, so that Las Cruces could be a hub for film training across southern New Mexico, which makes all the sense in the world given our assets, and that would be a huge win for us.
We just have about a minute left, but I want to give you a chance to really weigh in on what are some things you're really excited about this 30-day session to work on and get involved with that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, certainly some of the education work that we're doing, the funding is really important. Providing lottery scholarships to provide tens of thousands of affordable opportunities for kids to go to college is really important. The climate change legislation I mentioned is important. Certainly the Film Academy would be huge for Las Cruces. I'm also trying to put the Rio Grande Trail project on turbo, and that there's a lot of great work going on in Doña Ana County, so helping to grow the outdoor economy. But beyond that, I mean, ethics, energy, environmental cleanup. I'm doing a lot of work on trying to stop high-level waste from coming into New Mexico and clean up abandoned uranium mines. So people can go and read my legislation at nmlegis.gov.
Yeah, right where your profile is, and scroll down, and once it's uploaded, I imagine once the session kicks off, they can read all about that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much, Senator Steinborn, for taking the time to talk with us on Your Legislators.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we want to thank you for joining us for an episode of Your Legislators. We'll see you next time. I'm Anthony Morneau.